And welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home. Today we have a really special guest with us to discuss a paper, but also a larger body of work that encompasses some of our favourite principles of research. So to talk us through all things co-designed, consumer-driven and integrated knowledge translation, we have Associate Professor Laura Miller with us. Hi, Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Ash and Dana. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm actually really excited to finally meet you and to see you. I see your name on papers all the time, and it's this really, I guess, nerdy thing that happens to a lot of us researchers. We're like, oh my goodness, I get to meet Laura Miller today. So it's very cool to be able to speak with you, and just seeing the body of work that we're going to be talking about today gets me even more excited. So yeah thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me talk about it. It's definitely one of my passions, and I really hope that you'll find it interesting and helpful.
I'm sure we will. But before we get into that, we'll tell all of our listeners a little bit about you, Laura. So Laura Miller is an Associate Professor in Occupational Therapy at the Australian Catholic University. Laura completed her PhD in 2014 with the University of Queensland School of Medicine, and she was awarded a Masters of Health Services Management with distinction in 2010 and a Bachelor of Occupational Therapy with honours in 1997. Laura is an active researcher within ACU's Faculty of Health Sciences, and Laura has international research collaborations with McMaster University's Canchild and Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Laura also holds a number of competitive international grants and has research interests in childhood disability and development, participation, motivation and engagement, family empowerment and health services research.
See, that's why we're so happy to have you on the show, and that's why we're gushing. So there's good reason there.
All of our favourite things.
That's right. We love it.
So, Laura, we normally like to start off with a little icebreaker question before we get into the nitty-gritty of the research side of things. And today's icebreaker question is very far removed from research. It's, what is your go-to TV show to watch at night?
Well, you might be surprised to know that my favourite TV show is actually The Doghouse, and I absolutely adore animals, and I particularly adore dogs, but I am an absolute softie for any kind of rescue or supporting, dogs that might have had a difficult start to life. And so I spend a lot of my time in tears watching it, but a lot of my time just so excited to see the good outcomes for all the puppies. So that's my absolute favourite TV show, and I have been known to cancel plans because I didn't realise it was on that night.
I love that, and I'm with you on the bring a box of tissues to watch The Doghouse Australia. It's I think there's a UK version as well.
There are. Yep, I think we've all watched it. Nice one, Laura. Mine is a little bit different. I love The Office. If anyone's been talking to me lately, they'll just know that I just keep quoting lots of different things from The Office. And when people don't know things about The Office, I feel really disappointed. But I absolutely adore it. So I watched the American version. I haven't started the UK version just yet. But that and Seinfeld. So I love those sort of short, sharp comedies.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, along the same vein, same channel as The Doghouse, but my current TV obsession is MasterChef. I cannot cook. I know nothing about cooking, but I appreciate people who do and who can. But I suppose one of the negatives to watching MasterChef every night is that I'm eating a lot more at nighttime because I'm getting food envy. All these people cooking these beautiful things, especially the desserts. I'm like, I could probably do with a little bit of chocolate while I sit here and watch this. So yeah.
I found that I thought that I could cook until I watched MasterChef, and then I realised that I was very inadequate and never wanted to have a dinner party again.
Oh no.
I love the different effects of MasterChef.
Watch with caution.
Yeah, that's right. Disclaimer. All right. Well, now that we know about TV shows, which I think does link into research, I think those are the downtimes where you give your brain a bit of a rest so you can get into the good stuff, you know, that makes a big impact. Yep. So let me tell you a little bit about Laura's work, ENVISAGE. So the aim of this particular paper we're talking about is to look at the study of parent perspectives of ENVISAGE, which stands for Enabling Visions and Growing Expectations. It's co-designed by parents and researchers and is an early intervention program for parents raising children with neurodisability. So using an integrated knowledge translation approach, this feasibility study explored parents' perspective of the comprehensibility, acceptability and usability of the ENVISAGE workshops. Participants were Australian and Canadian parents of children with neurodisabilities more than 12 months post-diagnosis who independently reviewed ENVISAGE workshops using an online learning platform, and parents completed study-specific surveys about individual workshops. Following this, qualitative interviews about their perceptions of ENVISAGE were conducted. So 15 parents completed surveys, of whom 11 participated in interviews. Workshops were reported to be understandable, relevant and meaningful to families. ENVISAGE was judged to empower parents through enhancing knowledge and skills to communicate, collaborate and connect with others. Pragmatic recommendations were offered to improve accessibility of ENVISAGE. So what does this mean? Well, ENVISAGE workshops addresses key issues and concerns of parents of children with neurodisability in a way that was perceived as empowering, and involving parents as reviewers enabled refinement of the workshops prior to the pilot study.
Thank you for that, Dana. And Laura, before we get into the details of this paper and ENVISAGE as a research program, I was hoping we could kind of set the scene for our listeners a little bit. And we know that parents raising children with early onset neurodisability often, have lots of challenges that can complicate that parenting experience and journey and ultimately impact on how the family functions. So I think as clinicians, we kind of understand some of this maybe anecdotally, but could we talk about what the research evidence tells us?
Absolutely. So I think you're spot on there talking about the complicated nature of raising a child with a neurodevelopmental disability. And in our study, we defined early onset neurodevelopmental disability according to the work by Morris from Exeter University, which looked at congenital or acquired long-term conditions attributed to impairments in brain or neuromuscular systems. So that might be cerebral palsy, autism, rare genetic conditions. And we also were looking at children where the condition started before the preschool years, but there was an impact on child functioning across a broad domains of their life. And I think this is the complexity around neurodevelopmental disability, is that conditions may vary over time and often occur in combination with multiple impairments across different systems, which requires a really collaborative, multidisciplinary, multi-system approach. And in the families that we've spoken to across the ENVISAGE program and across all the different phases of ENVISAGE that we'll talk about, I think one of the things that really struck me was when we asked parents about their child using the About My Child measure from CanChild, we asked them to identify from a list of 19 different concerns what their concerns were with their children, rather than asking for a specific diagnosis. And the mode for our sample was 15. So parents were reporting 15 different complex concerns that they had for their children who were in that study under the age of 6. So I think that really gives us an indication of the number of different challenges children might be experiencing, and then the impact that has on family life and family functioning.
I've really noticed lately, like how you've spoken about that is so important, because we talk a whole lot about diagnoses, but what I've been really noticing lately is we're kind of going, well, especially in the early years, a diagnosis is quite limiting when it comes to access, support. You know, they're very diagnostic specific, yet the impact that it has is quite broad. And like you just listed there, you know, there's several areas of complexity that maybe one diagnosis doesn't really quite cover. So I guess, you know, is this seems like a new trend in terms of how we're talking about it. Is that the case, or, you know, how's this come about?
I think so. And I think parents are really wanting health professionals to see children beyond their diagnosis. Yeah. Their children are not the diagnosis. Their children are made up of all amazing things that they do, feel, think, see, hear. And I think that, you know, diagnoses can be quite limiting. It can be very helpful in terms of accessing support and services and understanding conditions and finding the best interventions. But I think that parents know their children in a very different way to what a diagnosis might portray, or how somebody might understand a diagnosis to be. And I think that getting to understand where the areas of concern are and how that's impacting on the child's performance and participation is so much more important than a label or what a child can and can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine, you know, we've talked previously about the diagnostic journey that a lot of families go on, and, you know, talking to different teams and you know, the multidisciplinary approach that's so important for children with neurodevelopmental disabilities can be a big challenge for families, you know, having to constantly advocate for their child and be providing people with information over and over again. I imagine that it can take a toll on parents, and I was hoping you might talk to us a little bit about the impact of the stress and overwhelm for parents.
Certainly, and I think there is a lot of emerging research into this space around assessment and evidence-based assessment and the diagnostic journey and the impact on families, not just at that time, but further into the future. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the things that I think is most important to consider is that this isn't just a moment in time. This is a life course for families. And so we know that parents report that that period of diagnosis leading up to diagnosis, the receiving of the information, is really a time of stress. They often will feel isolated or disconnected. There's been a long process often to get a diagnosis, or a stressful process to get a diagnosis. And I think that, you know, parents are understandably anxious or fearful or concerned about their child and what this means for them. But I think what families have been telling us is that the negative experience of diagnosis is magnified so much more if health professionals are presenting that information in a negative way, or scoring children against an arbitrary pass-fail or a numerical number, because they know their children so much better than that, and they know that they're so much more than that, and that they have all of these beautiful strengths and attributes that are not measured on a lot of the diagnostic assessments we are looking at. Yeah. And so I think in comparison, if you have a diagnostic process that really focuses on strengths and possibilities, that is realistic but hopeful, the experience for families can be very different. Yeah. And I think we have a responsibility to support families through that process, that from their first interactions of approaching a health professional or a teacher regarding concerns around their child's development, that we frame that in a really positive, supportive and hopeful way.
Yeah. I think that highlights so much about the power of our words and when we're communicating with families, and to be really thoughtful about, you know, how we're framing things for families, particularly in the early days, and being sensitive, and just knowing that our words can carry a lot of weight and can stay on someone for a much longer time than the time it takes to leave your lips, isn't it? Like there's a big impact on what all that's communication in those days.
Absolutely. And parents have told us that process or the experience of diagnosis can really change the trajectory for them in their parenting, in their interactions and relationships with health professionals, whether they trust services moving forward, and most particularly on their health and well-being of them themselves as carers, but then also the impact on the whole family as well.
And I guess that leads us really well into this paper. Now, I know this paper covers one part of your entire research program, and I think there's some real key features about what ENVISAGE covers in terms of how well you worked with a big, broad group of people. Can you just talk us through how ENVISAGE was really put together, I suppose?
Yeah.
Well, this is the best bit to talk about because it's been such a fun journey and it's been quite extraordinary. And I have to say that I am one person that is part of a very big ENVISAGE team. And we critically have parent partners as part of this who unfortunately don't have a voice here today because the difference in time zone. I would have loved to get some of our Canadian parents along. But the ENVISAGE project really came from discussions with the three chief investigators, so Peter Rosenbaum from CanChild, Christine Innes from Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and myself around, we all worked clinically, we were all working with families, and we really saw the impact on family health and wellbeing and caregiver health and wellbeing. And we thought that really there needed to be something done about this. We saw families that were very stressed with having pretty poor health outcomes for them in terms of their physical and mental health and emotional well-being. And we really felt we had a responsibility to look at ways where we could reduce that, ameliorate that, and if possibly prevent it from happening in the first place. And so we started with some ideas about how we thought that might look, and we ran a series of webinars in both Canada and Australia with a group of parents of children with disabilities, and just talked about ideas about what kinds of things they were thinking, what did they want? And that's really where this research question arose from the very beginning. And so we worked from that group of 5 families, from that group of 30 families in each country to develop 5 key themes that were going to be part of the ENVISAGE program, and went about developing caregiver partnerships to develop this program of research. And so ENVISAGE, the whole project of ENVISAGE has 5 phases to each of the projects that we have, with the first phase being caregiver partnerships, the second phase being workshop development and material and resource development. Phase 3, which is the focus of this paper, is really around acceptability and comprehensibility testing with people that haven't been familiar with ENVISAGE before. The 4th phase is around mixed methods pilot study of effectiveness and impact. And then the final phase is the large-scale randomised controlled trial of effectiveness. And we've applied that phased approach to all of our ENVISAGE programs.
And it makes it so clear for, you know, as a reader to come into this paper, and there was a beautiful figure in there where you outlined all of those phases.
Beautiful. Loved it.
You know, the approach that was taken and will be taken across each of those phases. It makes it really easy for someone outside of the program to understand, I suppose, the context for each of the pieces of work that you're doing. And so, just wanted to commend you all on, how easily understood this work is, which, you know, is much to make something so easy to understand is actually a really complex thing to do. So just wanted to say congratulations on that.
Oh, good. I'm glad it comes across that way.
I guess this really does, you know, the way you describe that, it really highlights, you know, where research is at the moment, and it is looking at integrated knowledge translation approaches, and it really is co-designed through really authentic partnerships. I mean, you've heard us talk about this quite a few times now in the podcast, but it is where it's at, isn't it, Laura?
Absolutely. And I honestly would, hand on heart, say that research is improved and 100,000 times better when you include your consumers and key stakeholders as part of the process. It's such an enriching process for the research, but also for us as researchers or clinicians, and then also for the consumers who are involved in that, who are really passionate about contributing to the field and hopefully having better outcomes for people. So the co-design process for us was absolutely critical to every element. And we, like I said, we started with actually developing the research question in collaboration with families. And all of our ethics documentation, all of the grant proposals, all of that work was done in collaboration with parent partners. And we actually have parent partners who are part of the investigator team, named researchers on all of our grants, who we pay for their contribution and their role on our team. And then we also have a huge number of parent collaborators who contribute to workshop development and also dissemination of information.
That's wonderful.
And I think that has just created such a richness to the work and is critical in terms of the effective and immediate implementation of findings into practice. I suppose just to give you an example of one of the things that we have taken really seriously about the co-design process is there are different elements of how you can involve consumers in research, and it can be from involvement and just getting feedback at that, this is what we're thinking, this is what we've done, what do you think, versus true collaboration and empowerment. And I think that what we've really strived towards is that true collaboration and empowerment where parents have equal or more decision-making power in the research process. And an example I can give you is in phase 4, when we were deciding on which measures to use, we researched lots of different measures that measured our topic of interest, but we worked with parents about which would be the most acceptable measures to them in terms of language, in terms of length, in terms of usability. And parents made the decisions about which measures we were going to include and certainly had very clear indications for the ones they didn't want included.
It's such an authentic example of collaboration and co-design, and you talked about empowerment, and I think that's something that really, as well as empowering the parent researchers who work with you on this program, I think, what flows through really nicely through this paper as well is the idea of empowering the parents who take part in the ENVISAGE workshops as well. So I think, the whole thing speaks of really authentic partnerships and empowerment. So I'm really excited to get into the findings of this paper.
Let's talk about the findings now. And I guess for all of our listeners, this is such a great, there's so many take homes in this in terms of the kind of conversations that we can be having and how that can be shaped as well. So I guess maybe I know that there are several themes. There are 6 main themes which we're going to talk through briefly now that emerged from the analysis.
But I suppose before we do Dana, what we probably should go back and explain to our listeners is how you actually arrived at those themes. So very, very briefly, because I'd rather us spend some more time actually talking through what those themes are. Perhaps we could talk about, you obviously did a combination of surveys and qualitative interviews. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you as someone who loves learning about qualitative work is this interpretive description approach and how you use that to draw out knowledge that's relevant to clinical practice. So could you just very briefly explain that to us, Laura?
Sure. It's a complicated word.
So I've been practicing.
Description, yes, it was really developed initially in the nursing literature, medicine and nursing, but has rapidly expanded through to allied health, which really addresses the limitations in some of the more formally established qualitative traditions. So, and it's really about reliably answering questions around health and illness experiences, so that those perceptions and experiences of individuals, their subjective understanding of that, with the specific aim of being able to produce practical outcomes, whether that be around policy change or intervention or service delivery or further research. So it's really around being able to take the individual experiences of people and aggregate that information, but also being able to, not just say that this is the experience of all, because there's always going to be individual subjective experiences of people, but then being able to use that knowledge that you gain from that questioning to inform practice. And for us in ENVISAGE, we really wanted to learn from parents who had been on the experience of raising a child with a disability over a long period of time. So these were all parents of older children who participated in this phase of the study, to be able to understand whether ENVISAGE was relevant and meaningful, and then what we needed to do to change to make it more accessible in clinical practice. And so that's why that methodology fit really well with the aims of the ENVISAGE project, and it's the methodology that we use throughout the whole program.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
All right, so I jumped the gun. Sorry. Theme 1. So theme 1 was ENVISAGE is needed by us, and that's been parents. So Laura, can you just talk us through briefly what that means?
So we really wanted to understand, that the themes the themes that underpinned ENVISAGE. So there's a series of 5 workshops that parents work through that are followed up with online discussions with a group of parents. And those online discussions are facilitated by both a parent of a child with a disability and a clinician researcher. And we really wanted to understand whether these workshops were meaningful and relevant and important to families, and at what time, at the time of diagnosis, earlier on in their experience or later. And one of the things that we were asking parents about was, what was their experience of ENVISAGE, and did the topics that we cover resonate with them? And so this theme emerged from parents saying to us that we go through this process of diagnosis where we're just exhausted, we're just surviving. It is a significant period of stress and anxiety for individuals, but for families and for extended families, and that when they reviewed the materials for ENVISAGE and the resources that we had, there was a resounding yes, that this is needed. This is what we want. This is what we want. So we need support. We need information. We need help to access that information. We need it at a time that is relevant and to us, and we need service providers to understand this in the context of our whole family, not just in the context of in their individual child with a health condition.
And I think
I think parents really talked about that they were in this constant state of doing, and they needed to constantly be on the run and on the go, and seeking help was really hard. And this really brought things together for them and presented it in a way that was accessible and useful at a time that they needed it.
No, that's really good.
And then the second theme, Laura, was that ENVISAGE presents a new worldview, and parents described in this theme the way that, ENVISAGE was a different way of thinking and also talking about their child with a disability that they found really empowering. Could you talk to us about, what are the kind of the key ingredients of ENVISAGE that make parents feel that way?
Sure. So parents told us that they really felt that it was an innovative and positive way around talking and thinking about disabilities. So parents talked about the fear and stigma that they had experienced and felt that ENVISAGE really flipped it on its head and created this fresh and exciting new way of how they saw their family and how they interacted with their child and how they talked about their child with people in their environment, whether that be health professionals or even people within their family. And it was really around positive conversations focusing on possibilities and introducing their child in a way that focused on strengths, rather than, a list of medical conditions or surgeries. And so I think the 5 key themes that we work through in ENVISAGE is the ICF and the F words in childhood disability, which I'm sure everyone's very familiar with. But really the F words resonated with families is a way of being able to actually introduce their child and identify things that were important, what mattered most to them as a family and their child as an individual. We talk about family development and children becoming and belonging in the context of child, siblings, parents and the whole family. We talk about parenting as a dance led by the children, so the transactional relationship and the interactions and the importance of that reciprocal relationship between children and parents, reading your child's cues and how that can be difficult when your child has an impairment or you don't know the dance steps and some parents describe that as some days I feel like I'm doing the Viennese waltz and other days I feel like I'm in the mosh pit. And then there was talking about family well-being and self-care, looking after yourself, and then connecting, communicating and collaboration. And all of those things really together worked to enable parents to really shift their focus and have a different perspective on their child and their family.
And there was, I think one of the parents said, that the F words really helped. F words are brilliant and take the focus off disabilities and put it on abilities, which I think, is a really nice way of summarising the effect that a change in perspective can have for these families.
Yeah. Oh, that's why we love the F words. It's a great tool for us as clinicians, for us to think that way as well. But, this just shows how important they are for our families as well. And there is power in being able to share this with them. And you sort of touched on it there a little bit as well in terms of the themes of what you, or part of the actual ENVISAGE program itself. But I love theme 3, which is ENVISAGE values us, really looking at the parents themselves and their confidence, their self-belief and being okay to look after themselves. Can you talk us a little bit more about, some of the other things that I guess parents spoke about in terms of this particular theme?
Absolutely. So I think parents, we often, will say parents are the experts and parents know their child best. But I wonder whether in practice that's not necessarily how they feel. Sure. And I think when we were talking to parents about their experience of ENVISAGE, they told us that they really felt validated as parents, that they had strengths and skills and capabilities in raising their child with a disability and they were doing a good job. And that really built their sense of self-efficacy and belief and gave them confidence to make decisions. So they said that having that confidence in their own skills and knowledge was really important to them, and that recognition that they are valued members of the team and shared decision makers in the team and the most important person in that child's life was really critical. And I think, parents talked about how ENVISAGE created opportunities for them to identify their own strengths, to be able to stand up for themselves, to be able to access supports around them that they might have not otherwise done so. And I think that piece around self-care and prioritising your own well-being is so difficult for families who are so busy, and self-care can just feel like one extra task that they need to add to the list. But through the ENVISAGE program, families were telling us that they really felt supported and encouraged to prioritise well-being, that they identified where they needed to support, to engage in wellbeing, which there are tools, which I know is another a theme around how to actually go about that. So it's all very well being able to say, yes, this is important, but then how do you actually implement that in your daily life? But I think that parents really had a sense of acknowledging the importance of everyone's health and well-being in the family and everyone's right to look after themselves and engage in activities that nurture their own themselves and their self-care.
Yeah. And you touched on tools there, Laura, which I think, leads us really nicely into that next theme, which was ENVISAGE gives us tools. And parents talked about tools in a couple of different contexts. The first was tools to communicate, collaborate and connect with others, which I think you touched on briefly just there. Was there anything else that they expanded on within that theme?
Yeah, so we talk specifically with parents about building healthy relationships with professionals in their environment and also family members or anyone that they come into contact with that enable them to advocate for their child and family, but also provide them with support and that they need, because that role can be very challenging and tiring.
Yeah.
And providing information, resources, connections to services, evidence around different interventions or resources available, and bringing that all together for them gave them a type of guidebook in terms of moving forward.
Yes.
So feeling, like they were spinning in outer space, not knowing what to do, and then having all of these information brought together in a way that was clear and accessible and empowering to them really was received well in terms of being able to actually have tools to then implement this in practice. And I think that's a big piece. We know this in clinical practice. It's all very well having the information, but if you can't have the tools to do that in everyday practice, it doesn't happen. And equally with parents, there's a lot of resources available, but how do you actually then use this to support yourself and to support your child and your family?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that leads really nicely into, you already spoke there about accessibility, and theme 5 is, ENVISAGE must be accessible. And I love how, there's great thought about, the potential barriers and the headspace that families might be in those early years. They say they want this information and they want it as early as possible, but it's acknowledging that early phase of it, there's so much competing demands that are there at that particular time. But my question for you around that time, because I've seen some of the reports that come out, medically in the first month or 2 months, and it's pretty overwhelming to look at the whole list of medical terms that are there that if you have to start looking them all up, I think that induces a lot of anxiety. So I guess my question to you is, how can health professionals be more conscious of this? We don't fall into the trap of using so much medical jargon with our families. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. And I think Bridget O'Connor, who's one of our colleagues on the ENVISAGE Service Providers program, has done some beautiful work around collaborative assessment and talks about involvement of parents in that assessment and diagnostic and reporting process. And there's and parents in her work reported a real disconnect between their intimate view and connection of their child and their child's interactions with them, and then this very analytical, jargony, medical interpretation of their child, that if they read that to someone who didn't know their child, they'd have such a different picture of than what their child actually, who their child is and what they want to do and who they like to be. And so I think we really need to tune into parents around and check in with them whether what we're writing and what we're saying is making sense to them, and whether there is different ways that we can present that information that focuses more on positives and strengths and possibilities rather than deficits and impairments, which is often what parents, when they get those very complex reports, that's what they take away from. And so I really feel that no parent should go through that process without a really supportive, collaborative conversation. And where there is checking in, making sure that what we're talking about makes sense, for anything that you don't understand, giving time, making sure parents are involved, and being able to really attune yourself to where that parent is at and what information they're taking on, and then providing opportunities for follow-up, because we all know that when you receive information, whether it be in written or auditory, that you probably don't take in all of that, particularly if it's distressing. And so having opportunities to check back in with that family, not in a year's time, soon and repeatedly. And I think there's lots of system things that we need to think about in terms of time that we give to families to be able to ask questions. A quick 10-minute appointment is not going to be able to talk families through complex medical conditions or complex reports. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do about that, but certainly reframing our language and avoiding jargon, and certainly families told us this was too academic, too complex. You need to change that. This is how it needs to be conveyed in different ways.
And those are within our power to do right now, right? So for anyone who's working with families now, we can do that. We can make sure we follow up. There's some great practical things that can happen there and can make a very positive impact as well.
To have that awareness and catch yourself when you feel like you're slipping into that kind of complex terminology
and things that come out.
And like you say, Laura, just to check in and am I explaining that well, or does that make sense, at the time.
That's right.
And being able to reframe it if you need to is a really powerful tool. And those soft skills that we speak about a lot.
We keep talking about them. But they're huge.
Super
they're really
relevant.
Important.
And I think that ties in really nicely to the final theme from this paper, is that ENVISAGE is needed beyond us, and us being the parents who were participated in this study. So when they say ENVISAGE is needed beyond us, Laura, I think we've kind of spelled it out, but who are they referring to that should be involved with ENVISAGE?
Well, it's us, the service providers, and the professionals that they come into contact. I think families have such complex relationships when their child is diagnosed with a health condition that is mind-boggling in terms of the number of relationships that they have with people across so many different services. And when we were going through our phase 3 and then also phase 4, families were saying to us, this is great, this is what we need, this is what we want, this ticks all the boxes for us. But then when we go into our appointments with our health professionals, that's not my experience. That's not how they talk to me. That's not how I feel. And so they unequivocally told us that ENVISAGE for service providers was required, and that we needed to be working with people who are working with families across all different systems to be able to share these ideas and work with them to potentially introduce new ideas that people might not be aware of, but talk about actually how to implement those things in practice, and to give the perspective and a voice to parents who are the people that are on the receiving end of a lot of this information or these services. So they, unequivocally told us that we needed to develop a program for service providers, and that they wanted service providers to be very familiar with the ENVISAGE themes and use them in their clinical practice.
So that might answer my next question, which is where to from here with the ENVISAGE program, and what exciting things are you working on at the moment?
Well, ENVISAGE is now a 4-project endeavour. So we have ENVISAGE families, which is what we're talking about today, but we also have ENVISAGE service providers, which is what we've just talked about. We also have ENVISAGE First Peoples. We acknowledge that ENVISAGE families was not co-designed with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, and we felt that we needed a very specific program that was culturally sensitive and attuned to the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. So we are developing from the very beginning ENVISAGE First Peoples. And we've also started through a PhD student at Can Child ENVISAGE Croatia, looking at the transferability and cross-cultural of ENVISAGE in different cultural communities. So those are the 4 main projects that we're working on, and each of those projects has those 5 phases that we work through.
Wow.
So there's a lot of work happening in the ENVISAGE space, which is very exciting.
Very exciting. I love that. Well, Laura, you have summarised things so beautifully for us, and so many great thoughts there that are gonna linger, but we're not done yet. So we do have our next segment, which I think everyone waits for, and it is called Tell It to Ed. Now, as you all may know, Ed is our producer who doesn't have a background in child health, but he listens in very keenly about all of our conversations. So, hello, Ed. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Laura, in about 60 seconds or so, can you summarise your research, what we spoke about today, to Ed? And in turn, he'll be able to ask one question. Yeah.
Okay, 60 seconds. I better not talk too much. So I think what we've really learnt from our work in ENVISAGE so far is that we know that parenting a child with a disability includes many demands and is very complex, but we also know with the right support and that many parents develop rich, fulfilling and wonderful lives raising children with disabilities. And our parents are telling us that children with neurodisability add so much to their lives, but they need support and they need changes to empower them to start their journey on the positive foot, and that they need to be understanding, thinking, talking about disability in a more positive and strengths-based way. And so our parents have told us that early introduction of evidence-based ideas around childhood disability are really important to them and are really meaningful to them, and it positively impacts their well-being and empowers them to feel confident and capable in raising their child with a disability. So I think that parents have told us they want to know, they want to learn, but they also want to be involved. So we have learnt a lot through our co-design with parents, and we know that parents offer really deep insights into how services should be designed and delivered for them. So I think we need to continue to do that and continue to learn and grow from the people that we are working collaboratively with for the improvement of outcomes for all the family, not just children.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful summary. Thank you, Laura. Now, Ed, over to you for a question.
Oh, yeah, you've covered quite a lot of ground today, and I've liked this whole communication aspect with both families and with professionals, and it's been really, really enlightening. Obviously, like I don't have much, if any, experience in this area, but I've kind of learned what the F words are over the course of the podcast, which is great. And I think I constantly kind of come back to this idea of, because I'm learning about research and evidence-based practices and how that's really, really important, especially right from the very start. Given that the richest man in the world just bought a social media platform for free speech, how do you stop the proliferation of non-evidence-based practices? And was that something that you kind of came across in your project?
Absolutely. So we talk quite openly with families around myths and assumptions and different interventions or thought processes around childhood disability, and really bring families back to where they can access good evidence-based information in terms of the resources available on the internet, but also having that really good relationship with their health professional where they can talk through what they're thinking and what they are looking at online and what they're talking to other families about. So I think that there is a lot of information available to parents, and it can be very exhausting to go through all of that and to know which bits are important and which bits aren't. And I think one of the nice things that ENVISAGE does is it brings together the evidence base in childhood disability as it currently is, and we'll need to continue to evolve and grow to be able to reflect as new knowledge is formed. And we provide families with resources that we know are based on evidence with rigorous research. And I think one of the things that we're trying to model in the ENVISAGE program is that we're going through this very rigorous 5-phase process in order to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness to make sure that this is an evidence-based program and that it isn't something that just sounds like a good idea and seems to work for a few people. And I think we communicate that very clearly with families. But it is a really difficult world out there with lots of information, and it's a bit of a minefield for parents. So I think we as health professionals have a really important role in being able to have honest conversations with families around what they're thinking, what they're looking at, and not make any judgment about that, be supportive in their thirst for information and their need for information, and support them to be able to access information that is evidence-based in a timely way.
Oh, I love that. I love how there are strategies already incorporated into all of that. It's a great question, Ed. Well done.
Thank you.
Well, to all of our listeners who've been listening, remember we'll have links to this paper on our website, researchworks.net. And of course, there's a CPD form there that you can fill out, of course, as per usual, if you want to keep this as a part of a record of your CPD. But for now, we need to say thank you and goodbye, unfortunately, because again, we could talk for so much longer about this. Thank you so much for being on the show, Laura.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk to you today about ENVISAGE.
Oh, and we're excited to have you back to talk about all the other exciting things that ENVISAGE will have to offer the future. So,
absolutely, I think we've got a few projects in the works. So, would be really keen to talk to you about our updated findings.
Love it. Well, till next time then. So, to all of our listeners, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.